What are some good casinos to play 1, 2, 1, 3 cash and daily tournaments in Vegas non-WSOP time? Okay, well I don't know about daily tournaments, but I can tell you this. This is a good general cash rule, guys. Think of it like this. You want to always make sure when you're going to play cash games that you're playing in the game that's not the highest stakes at the casino. Because if you play the highest stakes game at the casino, it's always going to have the best players there. You want to find places that have 2, 5, 5, 10, 10, 20 going when you play your 1, 2, or 1, 3. Because then people with egos, people that think they're talented, people with more money, they're going to move up to those games and leave you in those soft, safe streets. Remember that. Hey Doug, what's your opinion on run it twice option? Always on, situational, only above XXXBB. Alright, so let's start running it twice. If there is no rake involved, you should always run it twice, because all it's going to do is decrease the variance in poker, right? And if you're a winning player, let's just say you have, a 3 big blind per 100 win rate over time. You really want to minimize that variance, because by having less variance, you're more likely to be able to play higher stakes sooner, right? And so because on average you get to play higher sooner, you get to make more money, it kind of helps you progress. Now, yeah, you're also not going to run hot, as hot and get to move up quicker, but over time you'll have less deviation and get to play higher stakes. Also, just for your overall mental well-being, if you face, a lot of variance and a lot of adversity on your journey through poker, it's going to make you play worse, it's going to make you not want to play as much, it's going to make you question yourself, it's going to make you do all these things. And it's funny because, if you win those all-ins, you don't question yourself, but if you lose them, then you do. So I think for just mental well-being and just ability to try and move in stakes as quickly as possible, you should always be running it twice. Now, here's the thing. If you get charged extra money to run it twice, it kind of becomes an expensive habit. I'm not sure what it's like on every site as far as rate goes for running it once or twice. But if there's even a 10-cent penalty for running it twice, I just say just let them run it, Because really, you don't want to give up EV to run it twice and decrease your variance. You just want to take the same EV and spread it out over more instances. So I would say, in general, yes. Unless you're playing someone, and this is something that I've seen people do, if you're playing somebody that tilts really hard, it could be cool just to run it once, because if they lose, they're not going to play, they're going to play their D game. As long as you know that you're a tough cookie and you're going to be able to take that loss and just hang in there. So that's my opinion. Is it possible to make a living at 1-2 NL in Vegas? I would say no. I think 2-5 is the lowest you can make a living at. And even then, I think 2-5 you can make a living, but it's hard to build your bankroll. I would not recommend trying to play poker professionally below 5-10. I think 2-5, if you're going to work really hard and have extremely low expenses, is totally fine. But you want to be careful there. I see too many people oh man, I'm making 40 an hour at 2-5 live. I'm going to play 100 hours a month, and I'm going to spend 4K a month. And the problem with poker is, as you build your bankroll, if you go on a downswing and you lose a bunch of money, how much money you have affects your ability to make money. It's not like a normal job. You can't just lose all your money or spend all your money. You're I'm still working on Monday. You're not, because you're going to have no money to play with on Monday. So, because of that, you want to be playing stakes that give you padding to pay and build. You want to be paying and building. That way, you're building over time. If you play 2-5, it's going to be hard to do that. 1-2, I just don't even think this is possible. Because let's just say you're crushing 1-2, you're making 10 big blinds an hour, and with how high the rake is, you're probably just not. That's only $20 an hour. If you work 100 hours a month, that's, it's only $2,000. So that's not really enough to live off of. It's definitely not enough to build off of. And if you start to work more 150 or 200 hours a month, guys, 40 hours in an office versus 40 hours playing poker are not the same thing. What's up? Not even close. 40 hours playing poker a week is so mentally taxing. And if you go to work and you suck, your boss is all right, sorry Johnny, you're going to have to pay us this week. Yeah, your work sucked. We'll take $1,000. I need to come back next week and work hard, So, or maybe you actually showed up, you did a great job, but you still have to pay your boss $1,000. So the point is this. You need to be playing, I believe either a really juicy deep 2-5 game with a lot of bankroll padding, or 5-10 plus to be able to play poker for a living in Las Vegas, or really, I guess, in anywhere. Hey Doug, huge fan member of Upswing. What's the best way to improve it about pot play? Thanks, man. Well, for starters, I think that when you have a problem with a spot in terms of the way you're approaching it, I'd start off with taking your sample and looking at it in a tracking program. look at hands you played, look at what happened, look at what your goals were, and start to break down each hand. Think about what hands they can have. Think about the math of your play. Think about, if you're jamming, what's your equity when they call? How often will they fold? What kind of hands do you think they're going to have? And maybe even hide your opponent's hole cards, just kind of walk through it. And just do that for a bunch of your hands. Like, get used to that process. I would also consider, if you're playing with people that you think are good, I would consider taking their sample and looking at how they play in those 3-bet pots, because I think that could be a pretty big help as well. If you're playing live poker, you're going to have a little bit more of a on the fly way to learn. So I would say write your hands down, maybe post them in the Upswing Engaged group. I think that could be a good way to learn. But in general, I would say in 3-bet pots, and especially in 4-bet pots, as long as you're not making any huge folds and you're trying to drive some value and you're working in some strong checks, and of course you're bluffing, I would say that you're not likely making too many mistakes. It's a little bit less complex, I think, than single raise pots, but it's hard for me to say, I guess, without knowing the way that you're leaking into pots. But that would be my advice to you. How do you play hands like 10s through aces 80 blinds deep when you raise early position, get called by mid and small blind, and flops like 8-7-5? I think 9-9 is a clear check, but mid position and small blind can both have sets. How much do we see bet in this spot? Okay, that's a good question. And I think there's actually a lot of different approaches in the way that you can play this spot. There's a lot of good players that just generally check most of their hands here, and they do some check raising, some check calling, etc. I agree with you that I think 9s is a clear check. Very good hand to be able to check call down with. The problem with checking hands like 10s and jacks is that your ability to bet turns is extremely limited. Ace, king, queen all suck. 9, 6, 4 all suck. So, with those hands, I guess I lean more towards betting. And the thing is, even though your opponents can have sets, you're gonna have these strong hands yourself, like 8-7 suited, sets, and your stronger over pairs, as well as some draws. You're gonna have 10-9 suited, etc. 10-9 suited, Jack-9 suited, some nut flush draw type hands. But anyway, if you're 3-way on boards like 8-7-5 where you don't have the straights very frequently, you have to be checking because you don't have those really strong hands to balance it out like 9-6 and 6-4 the big blind has, and both players definitely have a lot of strong holdings. That said, you don't want to live in fear of monsters, because if you have jacks and they call, like the mid-position player calls and the small blind calls, and sorry, I thought it was big blind. We're small blind, you don't have to be worried about straights. So it's pretty fair across the board. You're still gonna mainly be ahead. Like, you're more likely to be up against 4s or 6s or 9s or 10s or ace jack or ace 10. You're much more likely to be up against those hands than those like 9 combos of sets or whatever. So in general, I would say check call 9s. If you want to trap a few hands, you could check call hands like aces or kings. But hands like queens through 10s really need to be betting because they're so vulnerable to different turns. And I would also balance that out with betting some of my very strong hands like, sets and 2-pair. And my check call range, I'm going to have hands like 9s or 9-8 suited that I can, look to check call down. Also depending on the way I think my opponents are playing, my reads on them, etc. So that's how I would play that spot, man. If you want to do a more check raise based strategy, that can also be okay. There are definitely players that do that. I tend to not be as much in the check raise camp because I kind of hate check raising hands like 10s. If it goes check-check, it sucks. If you check raise and they continue, it sucks. I tend to just more like to bet to deny equity, but I do know there are some good players that play hands like that, so in general, I would say I play a much more bet or check call based strategy. You could have a check raise strategy where you're mixing in some hands that are like, queen jack backdoor flush draw, as well as a hand like 7s, clear value bets with some like backdoor type draws. C1/C3 hands, for those of you in the lab, you'll know what that I'm talking about. And then you can balance it out on some later streets. You could mix in some check calls there as well. Maybe check call hands like some sets like 8-8, which makes a much better check call than hands like 7s or 5s. Those hands are better bets. So, you could really mix your strategy up here. There's a lot of very reasonable spots. I will say this: it's not a great spot to be in. Both players do have a lot of strong hands, and you're not in position against mid position. However, I generally lean more towards betting these hands because I think it's the lesser of two evils. Bovada at 200 NL zone. Something that's zoom. Villain raises button to 6. Hero calls playing with King 7 of diamonds. Ace 8-6. Check villain bets. Hero raises $34. One calls. This is reasonable. Backdoor, not flush draw. Or the BDNFD as we call it around here. Turn 4 diamonds. Clear barrel. River 7. Barrel the river. Yeah, this is reasonable. You can definitely have 5s. You can definitely have 10-9. I think your river size... Actually, no, it's fine. It's kind of hard for him to have many 5x hands. He could have 7-5. You could have 5-4 is a bit questionable. 8-5-4 backdoor flush draw. He's generally not going to have 5x. Hands like 8-5, 6-5, 5-5, checking the flop back. Yeah, I'm cool with this. I think this looks good. This seems like a great hand to bluff with. You're going to have straights. Makes sense to do it with. Nice hand, man. Reno Fed says, what areas should one focus on next if you're familiar with most of the concepts explained in the lab? I think after you get through the concepts in the lab and all of the play it explains, which is, by the way, that's a ton of content, so make sure you really go through it to make sure you understand all of it. But if you are through all of that, what I would do next is I would take your sample of play and I would look at it in, you know, some kind of tracking program and see what areas you're leaking in. Compare your win rates in all the positions to good regs. You know, just some general ideas like, you know, in the big blind and the small blind, you're going to lose overall because you hit the post blinds, but you should be winning in your button through under the gun. You should be winning more as you get towards the button. You know, look at all of those things and see where you're suffering. Look at 3-bet pots, look at 4-bet pots, look at all those different things, because at that point, I think you need to start to put some more, you know, because like you're at the point now where you have a good overall game plan, and now you need to figure out where do I really need to put my effort to improve? Like, where are my weakest points? A lot of times in poker, it's your weakest points that, you know, fixing will increase your win rate by the most. Because let's say you're good at something. Like, let's say you're good at single raise pots. Trying to go from good to like perfect, you know, even though that's not really possible, it's only going to change your win rate a little bit. But going from really bad at something to okay, that'll help you a lot. So I would say look at your sample, look at where you're winning and losing, and then figure out what certain aspects you need to learn on. Ask those questions in the Facebook Engage group, on the Upswing Engage group, and get some feedback from people, see what other people, their experiences are like with it, and then use that to try and figure out what you need to be learning. How do I play Ace X around the blinds? Cut off button, especially small and big blind. Your new subby, Caspad. Oh, Caspad D. I see. Okay, Caspad D. So I would say that overall, you know, you're going to be playing Ace X in the big blind, basically always, if it's just one open, because your hand is too good to fold pre-flop. Small blind, you know, it's going to vary a lot. Your strong Ace X's, you're probably going to be always playing. Your middling ones, you're going to either call or raise. Maybe fold some of the middling offsuit ones. And your weak ones, you're probably generally going to be folding. The small blind is tough in poker, guys, because there's so many factors you have to take into account. Open size, open range, open strategy, rake, big blind, how likely is to squeeze. So many things. I really don't want to give you a specific small blind strategy for Ace X. It's just too broad of a subject. But I would say big blind, play it. Small blind, weigh all the factors and be willing to fold some. Button and cutoff, you're generally going to be opening those. You're pretty much always going to be opening it on the button. The cutoff, I would probably open my mid to strong ones. I might open my weak ones if the button and big blind look like weaker players. If I'm facing opens, I'm generally folding my low to mid ones, because here's the problem, guys. If somebody opens and you have a hand like Ace 7 off, when you call, the opener is going to always have hands like Ace King, Ace Queen, Ace Jack, Ace 10, and you're going to be dominated. So you should be conservative with those mid to low ones. If you do want to play the mid to low ones, I would probably say to bluff them and re-raise. Try and use your fold equity. But always play your mid to strong Ace X's. If someone opens and I'm on the button with a hand like Ace Jack, I'm always going to play that. It's just too good, right? So think about your kicker, think about the range, think about the size, and base your strategy around all those things and your opponent. It's not easy. I know it's not easy, but if I had to give cliff notes on this, I would say in general you should be playing these hands pre-flop. When do you think it's a good spot to overbet turns, whether in or out of position, or is it too tough to balance? Okay, well, I think overbetting turns, okay, so let's talk about overbetting turns versus overbetting rivers. I generally like overbetting rivers more because on rivers, it's easier to think about what hands your opponent can or cannot have. And in a lot of situations, like, let's say I open and someone calls, and the flop is like Queen Jack 10, and it runs out brick. If I bet all the streets there, I'm pretty cool overbetting the river because they're not going to have hands like Ace King, right? So I can go all in for a lot into a small pot with Ace King or with bluffs, and there's not that much they can do about it. At best, they have King 9, but they probably have a hand like 2 pair or a set. And those hands are going to have a tough time. So on the river, it makes way more sense. Equities have been realized. People have very specific ranges, and you can really, exploit people with a big bet size and get to bluff more. Turns are okay, but on the turn, a lot of hands have equity against each other, and if you use draws and get raised, it's a pretty huge disaster. So I don't think that it's something you can't do. I think there are boards to do it on, particularly the higher boards. And I think that if you want to have that as part of your game, it's a fine strategy. I personally lean towards kind of playing a more standard turn size strategy and use the river as my place to get my overbets in. That's a good question, though. And the last question here today, guys, from Jackson. Your thoughts on smaller open sizes from later position in 6 max no limit? Potting under the gun through extreme mid to a cut off and raising button. Okay, so, I actually did a lot of study on opening these different sizes in various high stakes games, and what I found was, and this is actually kind of interesting, open sizes ended up being pretty similar, because as you go bigger, you get less action, but when you do get action, you lose a lot more if you're bluffing. And as you go smaller, you get more action, but you need less folds. So I'm actually a pretty big believer that the size you open to does not really matter that much. I see what you're saying with potting under the gun because you're saying you have the strongest range, but the problem is you lose the most when you get 3-bet. So I wouldn't sweat it. I would pick something. I would look at your games. If you play in tighter games, I'd lean towards the smaller sizes. If you play in looser games, I'd lean towards the bigger ones. But I wouldn't base it as much position as I would base it on my opponents and the general state of the games. First question comes from Tariq Haji. Let's take this boom player question. All right, 2 set 5 cent, opening up ace 9 suited here. Sorry, calling ace 9 suited with facing an open here. Totally fine pre-flop, don't mind that at all. Wait, kick the flop. Okay, no flush draw. Very reasonable bet, and I call. Turn the nuts. Very reasonable bet, and I call. Size looks good here too. I think I can see where this is going. Bet, call. Bet. Alright, well, so let's talk about this hand a little bit. So first off, in this situation, you actually can have a few very good hands. You could have a hand like 2-2 or 3-3, given that you called an open. You're not going to have a hand like 7-7. That should generally be checking back on the flop. You're not really going to have a hand like Queen-Queen, because that's generally going to be 3-betting pre-flop. And you're not really going to have 2-2, right? Because there's only one combination of that. So, because of these things, you can't just call this with only full houses. You only have 3-3 and 2-2. It's only 4 hands. So you're going to have to call the nut flush. I don't really see a way around that. Yeah, you do lose. Shout out to FaZe Hugs, by the way. Thanks for the host, bro. GG. You owned me, but at least I got a few viewers out of it at the end. Congratulations, man. But anyway, so when I look at this hand, I'm thinking about this to myself, and I just don't really see how you can fold, because you just don't have enough full houses. Like, guys, you can't make big folds with flushes when, your only better hands are boats, when you don't really have any boats. Now, that said, I don't think he's very likely to be bluffing. He's going to have 7-7 or Queen-Queen here a lot, I think. But at the same time, if he did decide to turn a hand like 10s into a bluff, 10s with a heart or whatever, you're going to get owned. So I think putting some flushes into your bet call range is okay. A lot of people in these spots, like, oh, well, the guy's in nit. I can just always fold. And, you know, sure, if you feel very confident they're in nit, maybe you can lay it down. But in general, when I do not flush and it's hard to make boats, I'm generally just paying this off. So this is, whoa, okay. Yeah, you just don't have enough better hands. So I think you got to call this and probably lose. But, you know, that way you make sure to not overfold. He could have a hand, by the way, as far as hands he could bluff with, it's totally reasonable for him to have a hand like tens with a heart, or, you know, ace king with a king of hearts, or I mean, even if he thinks queen 10 or something isn't good, he could turn it into a bluff and raise. Is it likely? No. I think this is probably a pretty good fold, but if I'm playing someone that I think is even somewhat capable of bluffing me in these spots, I'm going to go ahead and be bet calling hands like this for the reasons I outlined earlier. Alright, let's scroll up here. I saw at least one more strategy hand. 1 p.m. strat question. In terms of balancing your range, what is your value to bluff ratio post-flop? Ah, what a tricky question. Well, what if I told you it should change by street, it should change by board, and it should change by bet size? Let me give you an example, guys. If the pot had $100 in it and you go all in for $1 million, you should have about 50% bluffs and 50% value bets. And I know that sounds crazy because you're like, what? But you're risking $1 million. Yeah, because the point is for your opponent to exploit you. They have to be calling, you know, if you bluff less than half the time, they could always fold. And if you bluff more than half the time, they could always call. So on the river, when you bet really large, you should try and be about half and half. On the river, when you bet small, you should try and be more value. Also, on earlier streets, you can generally bluff more because you have equity, you're more likely to improve, etc., etc. So, one sec. So yeah, it depends on the street. You can generally bluff more early, you can generally bluff more pre-flop. On the river, you need to be more careful and use a ratio that makes sense given your bet size. Good question, though. It's actually a great question. Live mixed game specialist. Over the past year, I've been stone bubbling 60% of tournaments. Variance, leak, both. Stone bubbling means you're either playing way too aggressive on the bubble or you're not playing aggressive enough in the early to mid game in order to not bubble. So probably loosen it up earlier in the tournament and tighten it way up on the bubble, IMO. Like, there's lots of spots in the bubble where you're going to have to make ridiculously huge folds pre-flop. Don't just be like, oh, I'm not going to be scared of the bubble. I'm going to show these guys who's boss, and then bust with, like, tens on the bubble. Okay, you need that cash. It helps your ROA a ton. And the final question, Jason Becker says, Doug, I'm a 5-10 reg. I limp call 2s and 7s. So connectors. This is a poor strategy. 8's up by 2.5 to 3x pre. Yes, definitely. Jason Becker. You need to be raising all of these hands. If you just limp only those bad hands, let's say I'm behind you, right? I can just raise you up and then post-flop know exactly what you have. You need to protect all of your hands by raising. When you raise these hands together, I don't know if you have kings, I don't know if you have jacks, I don't know if you have 4s, I don't know if you have king 10 suited. By raising all of your hands pre-flop, you really protect your ability to play those hands. And it's different once you face an open, then it's obviously okay to call. But I would never open the pot by limping unless I was very short stacked and I thought there was merit there. When you're playing a cash game, I think if you went by a rule of never limp into the pot ever, that would be a good rule. The only exception I could see is if there's a lot of limpers or if you're in the small blind and it folds to you. But you don't want to do this strategy. You can get away with this in really, really low level games, but as you move up in stakes, this is going to be really hard to get away with. Thank you for watching, and make sure to subscribe if you're interested in more highlights and updates from Upswing Poker. That's why I love you. That's why I need you. We're going to go for the roughly half pot bet here. What are you guys going to do with your share? I'm thinking Vegas and the Mirage. Actually, no. Like, what happened to the Mirage Poker Room? Was that a thing at some point? Because I'll tell you this, guys, it definitely isn't anymore.